Hi, my name is Lauren Ballantoni, and my report is on the book Sudden Sea, The Great Hurricane of 1938 by R.A. Scotty. This book depicts the stories of survivors of the hurricane of 1938 that struck Long Island in New England. It is also known as the Long Island Express due to the quick nature of which the hurricane progressed through the states. Scotty tells the story of the Great Hurricane in third-person narrative, introducing us to different characters of survivors and those who ultimately lost their lives. Scotty takes us into a world unknown to many, depicting the everyday lives of individuals living in New England and what follows with the Great Hurricane making landfall. We read stories of farmers, of newlyweds, of young children who were caught up in the storm. People were stranded in trains, rode rooftops to safety, and even watched children get sucked into the waters. Scotty also introduces characters and stories from the Jacksonville weather station and the Washington, D.C. weather station, whom were tracking the storm, and tells us of Charlie Pierce, who was the only one to predict accurately the path of the storm, but ultimately was overruled by senior forecasters. The hurricane of 1938 at first seemed to follow a normal path of a hurricane, starting on the coast of Africa, traveling across the Atlantic to the Caribbean and up to Florida. The Jacksonville weather station was on high alert due to the recent devastation of the Labor Day hurricane that struck the Keys a few years ago. A hurricane warning was issued for Florida, but fortunately the storm never made landfall. At the time of the issuance, the hurricane was a Category 5 with sustained winds of 150 miles per hour. The storm eventually downgraded to Category 3, and surveillance of the storm was transferred to the weather station in Washington, D.C. The forecasters in the D.C. weather station predicted that the storm would follow the usual path and fade out in the ocean, and did not transmit a hurricane warning to the New England coastline. However, the storm began to accelerate in speed, traveling up the coast at 40 miles per hour, and struck the New England area with relatively no warning. The D.C. weather station eventually issued a tropical disturbance warning for the New England area, but that was only 4 hours prior to the storm striking, and ultimately everyone thought the storm was just a typical September gale. The hurricane made landfall on Long Island around 2:30 p.m. Due to a full moon and astronomical high tides, storm surges were upwards of 40 feet. Here are some statistics of the storm. On average, flooding across the New England states was a staggering 13 feet. The Work Projects Administration estimates 682 lives were lost. Of those 682 lives, 433 deaths occurred in Rhode Island. Maine was the only New England state without a fatality. The American Red Cross estimated that 93,122 families were impacted, and that 6,933 summer dwellings, 1,991 other dwellings, and 2,605 boats were destroyed. All the dwellings on Napatree, a barrier island of Rhode Island, were destroyed in the storm, and the island was never built on again. Lastly, over 275 million trees were destroyed, and government initiatives were started to rebuild the forested areas of New England. Clearly, this storm had a major impact on emergency management, especially unearthing the lack in weather instruments to predict and track storms such as hurricanes. In 1938, tracking storms was difficult due to the lack in technology that we have today. Forecasters only had temperature, barometric pressure, cloud coverage, and observations from ships to predict storms. Forecasters also had to hand-draw maps, which was a time-consuming process. Therefore, analysts could not accurately predict the storm and wasn't able to issue a hurricane warning. The New England hurricane of 1938 and other notable deadly hurricanes of the 1900s sparked an understanding for the advancement of meteorological instruments. Today, NOAA has advanced instruments to help predict and track hurricanes, including aircrafts, weather radar, and buoys. With this advancement, early warnings can be transmitted and people can take action to prepare for hurricanes. These are my references, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation and learned something new about the Great Hurricane of 1938.